it's Dr. Gilchrist. I hope that you've had a wonderful Thanksgiving break. It's kind of chilly today. I'm snuggled up with Smedley, and I am going to give you a brief screencast on social psychology, in particular focusing on our relationships with other people as well as altruism. So I'm probably going to focus on these for a screencast because I would like to get to psychological disorders as soon as possible since our fourth exam will be coming up quite soon. So I thought that this would be a good way to cover it. So please make sure to listen to this and take good notes as you listen. So in class, we've been talking a little bit about how we view other people, and we've also spent some time talking about how we are influenced by other people, including such things as conformity and obedience. Now we're going to talk about the relationships that we form with other people. This lecture is focused on how we develop strong relationships. In particular, we will focus on romantic relationships, but I would also add that a lot of the concepts that bring people together for romantic relationships also come into play when we talk about friendships. And then finally, we will finish on talking about altruism and helping other people. Unfortunately, one of the things about social psychology research is that oftentimes the most interesting research is the research that shows our darker side of humanity. But one of the things that's nice, I thought it would be a good idea to close with a discussion of the ways that we help each other as well. So, how do relationships form? So, generally, there are a couple of different factors that affect the formation of various social relationships, friendships, as well as romantic relationships. One of the things that we know is that in our ancestral and evolutionary history, forming bonds was really important for our survival as a species. You were not going to be able to survive on your own if you didn't have other people around you. And we have carried that out even today in the modern age. Most people do prefer having friends and close relationships. And one of the things that we'll see is that there are many factors that affect how a relationship develops and how they're maintained over time. So, one of the first things that we know is that in general, you're a lot more likely to form friendships and relationships with people that are closer to you than people that are farther away from you. So, think about the fact that you're probably more likely to be friends with people that are in your residence hall compared to other residence halls. You are probably going to be more likely to form a relationship with somebody who is on the floor of your residence hall compared to other floors, or you're more likely to develop friendships with those in your suite relative to other suites. And generally, you will develop relationships with those people that you come into contact with very, very frequently. So researchers have actually found by looking at apartment complexes where people tend to be the most popular. And it turns out that people who are located near areas where you're more likely to come into contact with people, such as communal staircases, as well as mailrooms, are going to be more likely to develop relationships with people. And this can be due to the fact that the more that you run into people, the more familiar they become to you. Additionally, mere exposure plays a role. We tend to like things that are familiar to us compared to things that are not familiar to us. So proximity absolutely plays a role. And so does similarity. Generally, you are more likely to form relationships with people who are like you. So that includes things like your attitudes, your beliefs, your values, your interests, and so on. And generally, we're going to find that, yeah, there's this notion that opposites attract, but generally, we tend to find that for a friendship or for a long term romantic relationship, in general, you'll have a much more stable partnership with somebody who is more like you. And we even find that this pairing up includes similarity and attractiveness. in general, with romantic relationships, people tend to choose partners that match them in terms of their attractiveness. Generally, too, we like people who are likable. Anderson, back in 1968, found that people like others that have traits that are valuable to the group. Things like kindness, dependability, loyalty, and trustworthiness. Now, having said that, I'm sure you could probably think of some people who you might classify as being nice to a fault. And in some cases, that level of niceness makes you feel suspicious. It makes you wonder, what's in it for me? This person's too perfect. They must not really feel that way inside. So, one of the things that we actually find is that your average human being is bothered by people who appear to be too perfect. So, researchers actually had people interview job candidates. And depending on the situation, the job candidate had stellar qualities, they aced the interview, and everything went fine. In another case, same type of candidate, perfect credentials, aced the job interview, but they spilled a little bit of coffee on themselves. And so, one of the things that the researchers actually found is that for people who spill a little bit of coffee on themselves, interviewers by and large preferred that person. These small mistakes like tripping or spilling coffee on oneself actually makes us seem more likable because that makes us more relatable. And we generally want somebody who we feel we can relate to. Physical attractiveness, for better or for worse, will also play a role. One of the things that we know is that, in general, if you are physically attractive, you are going to have an easier time forming relationships or forming friendships. It's often been said that sometimes people are too intimidated by good looking people, and so those people are actually quite lonely. But the truth of the matter is that that's a myth. Generally, these people are not usually lacking for dates or friendships or things like that. Now, the question becomes, what defines attractiveness? And that is absolutely a very time bound and culture bound thing. So, the current beauty standard that we have for both men and women has changed over time. Now, having said that, there are generally some universals. Generally, good hygiene is really important, regardless of time or culture, and facial symmetry also seems to play a role. We tend to find faces that are more symmetrical to be much more attractive than faces that are wildly asymmetrical. Now, attractiveness does bring many social benefits. These people are viewed as happier, so that's really important. They may not necessarily be happier, but they're viewed as happier. They are viewed as more intelligent. They tend to be viewed as more sociable and less socially deviant, and they also tend to get paid a little bit more. Generally, they are more popular and they are more socially skilled because they've had opportunities to practice by being more popular and by people reaching out. Um, but the question becomes, does beauty equal goodness? So, part of the reason that people who are physically attractive are given all of these positive stereotypes is that we tend to believe that what is beautiful is good and that what is ugly is bad. So, if you go back and you look at many Disney stories, many fairy tales, the heroine or the hero is usually very, very attractive and they're also very good. The evil characters or the villains are tend to be ugly or don't look as attractive. And it turns out that this kind of cultural enforcement of this stereotype does create in us a very early preference for attractiveness. Um, but I want to really ensure that even though people that are attractive are viewed as happier and as more intelligent, they aren't necessarily any smarter or any happier than people who are less attractive. Now, what if you're not attractive? This all seems like it's pretty hopeless. But the good news is that one of the things that we tend to find is that there are more important things when you have a relationship with somebody than how good they look. Attraction is a way to get your foot in the door. And the good news is that mere exposure can actually make somebody more attractive to us over time. Um, and familiarity also plays a role. And I know certainly in my experience and probably in many of yours, the more that you got to know somebody, the more attractive they became. And additionally, there are other traits that are viewed as very attractive. That includes things like sense of humor as well as kindness. So now let's talk a little bit more about love and romantic relationships more specifically. There are different types of love out there. And so this largely comes from researchers. I believe Sternberg has what we call a triarchic model of love. Now, generally, the type of love that we tend to glamorize in TV and movies is what is referred to as passionate love. It is entirely based on sexual attraction as well as strong romantic emotion. And this occurs very, very early in relationships. And unfortunately, for any long term romantic relationship, that passionate love does tend to be short lived. So if you are expecting passionate love to continue to be present within 10 years of starting a relationship with somebody or getting married to somebody, that's just not going to happen. What we do tend to find is that early passionate love tends to be replaced with something called companionate love. This is a very strong sense of commitment and support for your partner, and it includes a sense of friendship, a sense of trust and respect for each other, as well as intimacy, sharing your innermost feelings, ideas, and values with this other person. So, how do relationships change over time? Well, generally, we tend to find that the long term pattern of sexual activity will change and people will report having less passion for their partner. Generally, we tend to find that it peaks within the first year of marriage and then it declines. So, how do people manage to actually stay in love if this passion declines, especially very early into a relationship? There are different things that you can actually do to maintain a romantic bond. And it's all about how you choose to relate to your partner. Um, so, John Gottman is a relationships researcher, and he boasts a very powerful ability to be able to predict whether or not a relationship will end just by looking at the way that people communicate with each other in these very, very small, thin slices. He refers to the four horsemen. So we have the four horsemen of the apocalypse. Likewise, Gottman believes that there are four major red flags that will let you know that a relationship is on the decline. So that includes criticism, that includes expressing contempt and almost hatred or lack of respect for your partner, defensiveness, as well as stonewalling. And this is especially important for when conflict happens. Now, if you think that you're never going to be in conflict with somebody that you care about, well, I have some really bad news for you. Conflict is a part of life, it's going to happen. And we tend to find that couples that stay together even when they're fighting, even when they are conflicting with each other, will continue to express care and respect for each other. And generally, happy couples will often tend to overlook the negatives and they tend to focus more on the positives. So we'll finish this up in the next section.